both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain, behind someone in whose sight I may find favor." She said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field which belonged to Boaz, who was part of the family of Elimelech. Just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." They answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." Then she fell prostrate, with her face to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Then she said, "May I continue to find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants." Word of God, word of life. Thanks be to God. Grace, mercy, and peace be unto you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. Well, if you notice where our flag is for B90, our challenge to read the Bible in 90 days, you'll see that we're almost through our history section, at least one of the first parts of history, and we have made it all the way up to Nehemiah, and we're talking about Ruth, so that means that we're sort of backtracking a little bit. But of all the ones that we have talked about so far, well, let's see if you can name them. Who have been our people of faith? Who was the first one? Abraham. Just call it out. Abraham. Who was next?
Moses.
Moses. What else? Who else? Gideon? Who else? David. And finally, Nehemiah. Now, what is similar between all of those? They're all what? Men. Okay? Men. And lest you think that God only cares about men, because that's all who basically are lifted up in the Bible for the most part, it is important for us to lift up a female representation of someone of faith. Some people might say, now, behind every good man is a woman pushing him in that right direction. And that may be very well the case. But for us, we need to lift up women so that we can understand that God loves women in places of leadership, in places of faith, and not to be subservient to men in that place. Think about it. Jesus reached out to women. Jesus spoke to women when it was not the norm to do so. He spoke to the woman at the well. He spoke to a woman after she had almost been stoned. She spoke to women who weren't even Israelites. Jesus was all about reaching out to people for whom it was not the custom. Jesus didn't care about some of those customs because he wanted to reach people. God loves people first, and then worries about some of the other stuff, the society stuff, later. So for us, we want to lift up women because women have just as much importance in the church as men do. If you haven't heard that before, I'm telling you today. If it's been a while since you've heard that, I'm reminding you today. Our representation for women right now is Ruth. So let's look at her life. Ruth was a Moabite, not an Israelite. She was outside. She was a foreigner. And so when she married into the Israelite faith, when she married into the family of Naomi, when she married into someone that was not of her kinsman or her country, it's just like anyone else who marries into someone from outside of Lexington, someone outside of Columbia, someone outside our own faith life. My dad is one of those people. He was an EUB. He was an Evangelical United Brethren, which became the Methodist Church then. And so he married into the Lutheran faith. And he didn't care where he went to church. It was only because my mom was a pastor's kid and my grandfather was a pastor that he basically came into her faith life. And as we sometimes joke about anybody that's outside the Lutheran faith that comes into being a Lutheran, they come into the light. They come into what is real in terms of Christianity. It's just a joke. It's not meant to be anything other than that. But for Ruth, she really had the deck stacked against her. She left her family. She left her faith. And she was now a widow. She lost her husband, just like her mother-in-law lost her husband. I don't know about all of you. Those of you who have had a mother-in-law, sometimes you get along, sometimes you don't. Sometimes things go smoothly, sometimes they don't. But usually, if you lose your husband, you're not necessarily bent on staying with your mother-in-law. That would probably be the last person that you'd want to stay with. That would probably be the last person that you would want to forsake your past and your history to stay with her. But Ruth was something special. She was someone who put faith in this new context of her life. Faith in the God that Naomi was servant to, and put faith that she was guided into the right path. So we left her out for a lot of different reasons. I want to talk a little bit about this fact that women have an importance in the church. That has not necessarily always been the case. Sometimes the Bible is used or abused or taken out of context because of where people are in their own social context. Some people take particular verses or particular books of the Bible, the ones that we're going to be reading in the New Testament especially, about how women should act and not act in the church. But think about it this way too. Who was the first person that was given the good news of the resurrection of Jesus Christ? A female. Mary Magdalene. Jesus felt comfortable enough. Jesus felt overwhelmingly comfortable enough to give that news to a female to tell the men that he was risen. He didn't wait around for a man to come by. He used who he wanted to spread that news. And if women were important enough to be used for that purpose, women should certainly be good enough to be in leadership places in our social context today. We're very fortunate that finally the church, at least the Lutheran Church, at least the ELCA and its predecessor bodies, saw that women had an important part to play in leadership roles. Maybe when you were growing up, all they might have been were Sunday school teachers, and that's all you saw women do. It certainly was when I was growing up. Or maybe the organist, or possibly they might have been on council, but that was probably not very much the case, depending on what part of the country you were in either. Slowly, surely, women have come to know important roles. My sister is part of a Missouri Synod Lutheran Church in Maryland. And the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church does not see women valued in places of leadership. They are not supposed to be more than just teachers. They're not supposed to be on council. They're certainly not supposed to be presidents of council or the congregation. But she has been all of those and more. And so it's coming to the point where more and more people are seeing the value. Some people would say that because of that, men are being detracted from their places and their roles. I don't see it that way. I don't think the disciples necessarily were, just because they were 12 men, were the only ones that Jesus reached out to. They might have been in his inner circle, but certainly they were not the only ones that were disciples. Shania Twain has a really good song that lifts up women and lifts them up and shows us what important positions women can do. Don't necessarily know the song word for word, but it goes something like this. She's a lawyer. She's a nurse. She's a doctor. She's an astronaut. She's a chef. She's a professor. She's a pastor. She's a mother. She's a teacher. She's a truck driver. She's a musician. She's not just a pretty face. She's the president. She's the lawyer. Maybe I already said that. She's the judge. She's anything that you can think of. She's not just a pretty face. And so for us to consider only the men in the Bible is discounting all the people that God lifted up in the midst of all those men. One of the things in the Bible we have to keep in contact with is that they were part of a patriarchal society where men were the ones who did everything and made all the decisions. Women were there for just a couple of certain very vital roles, and that was the help of the multiplication of people, the population growth. But as time went on, and that was not as much of a factor anymore, women were seen even more importantly. But there's more about Ruth than just her being a woman. She also lifts up for us of how we are to take care of widows, widowers, and all caregivers. Now, looking around this room, all of us have been taken care of or will be those who take care of others at some point in our lives. It's one of those big circles where when we're children, when we're babies, we are taken care of by our parents. But as we get older and as our parents stay alive a lot longer, we find ourselves then flipping that and we become the caregivers. And the role of a caregiver, whether it's for someone who is a widow or someone who is just aged, it doesn't matter. People should not have to worry about doing it on their own. This story is one that is important for us to see how God expects us to take care of those people in our community who have lost their livelihood, who have lost the means for taking care of themselves, who have lost the ability to take care of themselves. We've all heard the term, it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a village to take care of our loved ones. No longer should we be expecting that we have to do it on our own. We are called to be part of a Christian community. And all of us here, as we become caregivers to people who are aging, or who have lost the ability to walk, or lost the ability to take care of themselves because of illness or injury, certainly those spouses who have lost loved ones in terms of wounded warriors coming home from Afghanistan, those people who cannot take care of themselves, they need help too. They need support. This story of Ruth lists up how we are called to be supportive to others and take care of our own, but also take care of those who are not necessarily our own. This story is rich. This story is rich of fidelity. This story is rich in how someone gave it all up to follow someone that she cared about, but it's also rich in God's favor when we take care of others. The final thing that this story helps us understand, and that why it's so important to read the Old Testament, right at the end of this book of Ruth, we have this little bit of genealogy that helps us understand how Ruth, hopefully this is not a spoiler if you haven't read the story, but Ruth marries Boaz. And Ruth and Boaz then become part of the lineage that leads to the Messiah, Jesus the Christ. And so it's important for us to see that and to help us link into what we know as the New Testament. That's why all these books that we're reading are so important, so that when we get to the New Testament, we understand why it was so important to have a Messiah. So these stories that we're reading are not just superficial. There's a lot of meat to them, there's a lot of knowledge, and there's a lot of connection to what we know to be Christianity. So, what I'm hoping you get out of this story, A, women have a place from God's kingdom. Women should be lifted up in high regard for their place in leadership. We are called to take care of God's people, to take care of widows, widowers, and be caregivers to them. And also, that all of this is part of God's plan of salvation, to save us from ourselves. When sin overtakes us, the Messiah is there to redeem us. You didn't think that Ruth was all that much, but it does. It has a lot. So, if you didn't catch it the first time, you might want to go back and review the book of Ruth.